Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm with over 20 years of experience.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, or LTIF. It's focused on grocery-anchored retail real estate. These are the kinds of properties that some investors believe remain essential even in uncertain markets. People still need to buy food. That's what they say makes this sector more resilient and more stable over the long term.
Unlike many alternative investment funds that are only available to professionals, Greenman Open is open to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investments and a highly regulated structure.
Just remember, all investments carry risk. Values can go up or down, and past performance isn't a reliable guide to future returns. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but you should always speak to a financial advisor before investing. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Hello and welcome to Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
We've lots of economics to talk about today. We've had the summer economic statement setting out the parameters for October's budget. We've had the National Development Plan, latest version, revised, updated, with enormous sums of money to be discussed. But before we get to all of that, we want to talk about the latest speculation in the presidential election race. And let's start with Fianna Fáil, Ivan, because we've been mentioning a number of times on this show, you keep bringing up the name of Micheál Martin, and I keep knocking it back saying he doesn't want to do it. And funny enough, after we had recorded last week, I ran into somebody who was saying to me, the push in Fianna Fáil is going to be so strong on Micheál Martin to run if Mary Lou McDonald runs for Sinn Féin. And the theory was that the only Fianna Fáil person who could beat Mary Lou McDonald would be Micheál Martin, and that he would have to be called upon in the national interest to beat her to the presidency, right? This is the theory that was been put to me, right? And I maintained my position that Micheál Martin is just completely obsessed with the day-to-day politics of Bin Taoiseach. I'm not convinced he's looking towards retirement even at the end of 27, that he'll want to continue going. And funnily enough, I ran into him last Sunday night when we were suffering through the after-match dinner for the Cork senior hurling team after the implosion against Tipperary in the second half. And he got up and he made a rousing speech, fired up, which sort of made me realise he's more Cork than he is Ireland in many respects. That I just couldn't see him living out of Cork. I couldn't see him living for 7 years in Áras an Uachtaráin and not being able to go home to Cork every weekend. So then what happened over the weekend is a really interesting name came forward for Fianna Fáil, and that name is Deirdre Heenan. I don't know, are you familiar with Deirdre Heenan?
Well, put it like this. She was described to me because Mary Micheál had an academic background. She was from the Six Counties, and this lady is from Ulster University. But someone rather uncharitably described her as an Aldi version of Mary Micheál. A Fianna Fáiler said that to me. They also said to me, someone I really trust on Monday morning said, by the way, I've been officially told this is not true. So, but go with the story first of all.
Okay, well, it's funny enough when you say that's rather cruel to say Aldi version of Mary Micheál, but Sarah Carey was on The Last Word with me on when the news broke, and she also was of the view that you can't repeat history here, that Mary Micheál had a much bigger profile than Deirdre Heenan, that she wasn't some sort of unknown coming out of the north to be put forward, that she had been a reporter on RT television and had a profile from that. She also had a role in Trinity College.
And she was quite known as a religious kind of expert as well.
There'd be a bit of that. Now, I have to say, I actually know Deirdre Heenan, not personally in the sense of, I'm not sure I've even ever met her, but I've interviewed her plenty of times on the radio. She is a contributor to The Last Word on issues related to the North. She is a really, really good sounding board on issues in relation to the North. What does she lecture in? That's a good question. That I don't know. I think it must be politics or something, because she is so clued in relation to the whole relationships up in the North-South relationship. She was on the Council of State since she was from 2012. Michael D. Higgins had brought her in. I think she's a person, and I understand where Sarah Carey is coming from, that, you can't repeat, lightning doesn't strike twice. But I suspect that Deirdre Heenan, if she was suddenly promoted and the profile did become known. I think people in the South would like her. I think that there would be an element, and I've been getting a lot of pushback. The way you push back, I mean, saying, oh no, not Mary Lou McDonald for president, that you sort of represent a sort of a conservative middle class who would be determined to have anybody else.
The Middle Ireland that decides what happens in this country, by the way.
Anyway.
Memo to Matt, go on.
So I have a feeling that she, and sometimes in relation to, okay, you could say in the presidential elections previously, the people who've won have been known, but Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese were known, but not exceptionally well known by the general public. And I do think that, I think Catherine Connolly is going to have that problem on the left. I don't think Catherine Connolly is anywhere near as well known by the general public as her supporters seem to think, and that will go against her. Deirdre Heenan, obviously less well known, but I think with a publicity campaign behind her, she's the type of impressive person, impressive woman who might appeal to an awful lot of voters.
Well, first of all, it'd be Deirdre who. No one has ever heard of this outside of the kind of elite people that are on the last word.
She also writes for the Business Post, and which is also a niche publication.
Well, two X's ticking the box to say, you know what I mean, like she's elitist. But anyway, the point about it is this, that I can't say anything bad about her because I don't know her. But, let's be honest here, that first of all, we've got to take the fact that I was just looking at the betting in Paddy Power and Boyle Sports on where we're at with the presidential, and I couldn't believe it. It's even money favourite, Mairead McGuinness, and 5-2 Catherine Connolly, which is such a bias in favour of kind of recency and where it's at. Fianna Fáil are going to be caught in a situation whereby they've deferred proper consideration of this, and under their rules they're going to have a nomination process, not dissimilar to Fine Gael, where they open so on. Now, what happened at the time of Albert against Mary McAleese in 1997 when they last contested it? There was a vote, and Bertie was able to deliver the numbers in favour of his preferred candidate, even though he says he voted for Albert, which is Mary McAleese. So you've got to ask yourself, for Deirdre Heenan, can Micheál deliver her? But can I just go back to your first point? I have heard out of Micheál Martin's own lips that he gave a solemn commitment to the people of Cork South Central that he'd serve 5 years in the Dáil. He sought a mandate to be Taoiseach and to lead the country. He got that, and there are no circumstances whatsoever that he will be coerced into being a candidate, Mary Lou or not. So that, I think, can be safely eliminated. He's in charge of his party.
I've been telling you that.
I always believed that. Why would he give up the EU presidential role in 26 for that? So all I can say about Deirdre Heenan is that because she could be a fantastic cerebral person, but I don't know how she connect with the people of Kerry. I don't know how she connect with the people of Offaly. Like, the Fianna Fáil core vote is not enough to secure, as we saw repeatedly. I think the parties can only get about 4% of their core vote to do as they tell them in a presidential election. There'd be free agents after that. But put it like this, while I'm open to the idea that whoever Fianna Fáil nominates directly as a proxy will be a 5-2 co-favourite of 3, so I think you cannot form a market until you see what Fianna Fáil do, and opting out won't be an option.
Okay, I just checked on Deirdre Heenan. She's a former Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Ulster University, former Provost of the university's Coleraine and Magee campuses, so that means she was heavily involved in the administration, and she's a Professor of Policy Studies, which is essentially politics.
Very, very unrelatable to ordinary people. It's in the clouds of ivory tower.
Well, then, do you think it's Michael Flatley relatable to ordinary people?
So put it like this. The problem with Michael Flatley is he has no prospect whatsoever of getting a nomination. He's right up there.
That's not just the only problem with Michael Flatley.
What are the other problems with him?
Michael Flatley,
his ego.
Well, there is that, yes. I mean, I think it was a line, wasn't it?
Has he not brought Irish dancing to a modern culture?
Yeah.
River dance, outstandingly successful.
Well,
Successful entrepreneur.
He was part of a team in relation to that. Let's not forget John McColgan and Moya Doherty and the music ability.
But he did the dancing.
He did
which
the dancing, yes, exactly. And then he went on and he did his Lord of the Dance. And he's been caught up in all sorts of legal issues in relation to his house and loans. I don't know whether he's just looking for another nice big house to live in. But, he is going with this sort of populist approach, that I'll be there to stand to speak on behalf of the people who nobody is speaking for. Would you ever shag off with that sort of nonsense, this Trumpian nonsense? He has an awful lot in common with Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
Obviously, not the obvious thing, and I'm not making any allegations in relation. There's nothing about Michael Flatley in that regard which completely and utterly disqualifies Conor McGregor.
Nomination.
Sorry, the point I'm trying to make before you can come in and make a point, yes, on that. But he's a man who is hawking whiskey around the place, like Conor McGregor. He's also a friend of the Trump White House. He's the two most prominent Irish people to get invited to the White House this year, other than our Taoiseach, were Conor McGregor for St. Patrick's Day, but Michael Flatley was also at the inauguration, and he was also up at the US Embassy the night you were slagging me off for going up to the US Embassy for the 3rd of July, the night before the 4th of July celebrations. Spotted, it wasn't like I was hiding.
It was right
I
up
was
there.
in plain sight, Ivan.
We will be doing our awards later on one of our summer specials. It was right up there for Hypocrite of the Year. But anyway, carry on.
And Michael Flatley was playing his flute on the stage. And I think hopefully the US Embassy or the US Ambassador's residence in the Phoenix Park is hopefully as close as Michael Flatley gets to Áras an Uachtaráin, because what he said in that interview with Brendan O'Connor on RT last week, was just all of the sort of the usual populist bullshit hallmark type stuff. And that's not what we need. And I think the Irish people wouldn't take Michael Flatley seriously. Although, the interesting thing came up as well. Some of us were joking the other day about, is he eligible given that he wasn't born in Ireland? But we've had 2 presidents of this country who were born outside the state. Can you name them?
Well, De Valera was one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's the second?
Tell me.
You don't know?
No.
Erskine Childers was born in London.
Okay.
I actually didn't know this until listeners started texting in details to
So, can we get back to the real world? So, Conor McGregor...
I am talking about the real world. What are you on about?
I'm talking about Dr. Tony Holohan.
Yes, the former chief medical officer.
Yes. So first of all, we read over the weekend that he was seriously contemplating putting his name forward to be the next president of Ireland. And I thought, sweet Jesus, the man is delusional from this perspective. First of all, nobody wants to revisit COVID, lockdown and all of that. We've never and are not going to have a proper COVID inquiry. And, the truth be told, for a lot of people outside of establishment Ireland who think everything was fantastic in terms of Neffet's handling of the whole situation, the reality is from antigen testing right across to nursing homes and so on, I think he's a lot of questions to answer. I think he's a hard neck. I think doubly so because he tried to move his switch out of being chief medical officer with a sort of job in Trinity College, which was done,
But it didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't. Well, it didn't happen because it wasn't let happen, but he tried to do it. So first of all...
So you could say that the government tried to do it.
Well, let that be so. The point is he wanted it, and he was obviously in favour of it. So what I'm trying to say is that he is absolutely anathema to anybody in the hospitality sector. Do you remember the meals for $9.95 so you could get a drink? All of the crazy restrictions to 2 kilometres and all the rest of it. So put it like this, of all the people, leaving aside, your antipathy to the anti-vaxxers and all of that, that is just the most daft idea that any party would nominate him.
I can't see where he got nomination. I see Peadar Tóibín Ventu as one of the first to articulate much the same as you've just articulated there. You're starting to sound like...
No, I hadn't heard Peadar. Because Peadar's ponies, I think, are going nowhere in this.
Well, so it's very much a sort of... He will be known as Lockdown Tony if he actually managed to get things.
And was very... At a particular point, you remember he took a break...
I was in fairness because
when he came back, he slapped down all the restrictions again, doubled down on everything in a very personalised, authoritative way.
I just finished that. I mean, he took the break because he was caring for his wife as she was dying and the rest of it. When he came back as well, that time after, I think he did sort of enforce a more dramatically stern shift in relation to lockdown stuff. So I just don't see him getting a nomination.
Where I think the real world is at in all of this is that I've said we're moving back to a more typical party political election. I think there's a real prospect that the Sinn Féin candidate will end up being Lynn Boylan.
Well, sorry, she's
MEP.
one of three now, apparently. They only have three possibilities. It's Mary Lou MacDonald, it's Micheál O'Neill, or it is Lynn Boylan. John Finucane is just not going to work as a candidate because he just simply, a bit like, as I said about Catherine Connolly, the majority of people wouldn't be able to pick him out of a lineup. They wouldn't know who he is.
But the important point is this: Sinn Féin will run a candidate and have, the numbers to do it. So I'm looking.
Yeah, but would Lynn Boylan be like their last MEP candidate, Leah Ní Riada? Remember Leah Ní Riada? Remember how her campaign imploded? I mean, is Lynn Boylan a sufficiently heavyweight type figure? She's somebody who has been re-elected as an MEP, having previously lost her seat. Is she sufficiently strong personality?
Well, on a very poor day for the party, she secured re-election as a Dublin MEP. I think she's got a softer image than some people, and I'd certainly give her a better chance than Catherine Connolly. Definitely would.
You'd have to on the basis of Sinn Féin support as against the support for the parties and groupings back in Catherine Connolly.
If she is the candidate along with Mairead McGuinness and Catherine Connolly, you're seeing a situation emerge that is quite a conventional political type candidate and so on. So I put it as, I think Fianna Fáil will run someone in those circumstances, and it's there to play for. But the idea that Mairead McGuinness is an even money favourite, which is pretty shoe-in territory, I just think it's daft.
Front runner as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, the presidential campaigns of previous years have shown that being the front runner does not necessarily. I suppose Michael D. Higgins was the front runner the last time as the incumbent, but he certainly wasn't the front runner in 2011, was he?
Yeah, no, but the other advantage of having politicos as candidates, they're used to the rough and tumble of reading stories in the ditch or anywhere, stories that they're just more robust than someone who's come from outside the political fold. So I think that's the way that's going to evolve. But end of August is where both Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil make a decision.
There was one theory, I think John Drennan floated this in the Irish Daily Mail during the week, that there are people in Fine Gael who want the government to call this as a snap election in September. That you actually, you're looking at me with your jaw sort of
they've
drops.
got 4.5 years to run. Why would they call a snap election?
No, a snap presidential election.
Sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sorry, right?
Yes.
No, so basically, apparently you can do it within 60 days of the president standing
it's
down.
James Brown's decision.
Hold on a second. Jesus, you're really, I know you're heading off on your holidays, but you're really not letting me develop any points this morning.
Well,
just to inform you, to let you know what the actual story is before you pass a comment on it, right? So basically what it is that it has to be, I think, within 60 days before the 11th of November, which theoretically means you could call this election in late August, early September as a 3-week run-in and not have this thing of running on until late October, as many people expect it to actually be. Do it when the weather is better. And actually the reason why Fine Gael would try and persuade Fianna Fáil to go early is because of this thing that the Mairead McGuinness has momentum at the moment, but the longer you leave it go on, the more likely is she will lose that momentum.
Yeah. That is a Fine Gael idea which is not going to be agreed by the government. Okay, that is absolutely their tactic and so on. Now that we know the budget is on the 7th of October, they're also saying if it's an unpopular budget, doesn't have a cost of living package or anything else, to do it before that. It's not going to happen because Fianna Fáil aren't going to agree to it.
Why wouldn't they?
Because they need time to get their candidate in the field and enough time for Mairead McGuinness's sell-by date, best before date to elapse.
Okay, but even if it means that hands the momentum to Sinn Féin?
Well, put it like this. I just think that you know, just because Fine Gael wants something is probably a good reason, you know, for Fianna Fáil not to go for it.
But you know, what's also interesting is, and I know you believe that there's no chance of Mary Lou McDonald taking the nomination from Sinn Féin,
Yeah.
and you say you're insiders.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding interesting about this is one of the first times that you're actually seeing almost a dissent within Sinn Féin been played out in public. That there are people, small number of TDs, the likes of Claire Curran, have come out and said, oh no, we don't expect Mary Lou McDonald to be running and the rest of it. But the word seeping out is that there are people who are saying, oh no, we can't, that she has to stay in place. And then there are others who are thinking, well, maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe it's actually a good idea that Mary Lou runs because, as I said, then they can push the United Ireland agenda as part of a presidential campaign. If they get her into place, they can continue to push it. But there's normally no sign of any division within Sinn Féin becomes available to us to see publicly. There seems to be a degree of internal dissent as to what the best thing to do is.
I'm hearing exactly the opposite.
Okay.
That Conor Murphy has been sent down. He's in the Shannon. He's there a couple of days a week and he is now running the party. That the situation is that they've brought the Southerners on side and he is running a tight ship. So whether they push out the boat on being very attritional in the Dáil on every issue that we spoke about previously, or whether they push the boat out on Gaza, that Conor Murphy is the boss.
So you're saying de facto leader. So in that case, if he's the de facto leader, is Mary Lou McDonald happy with that? And could it be that she might say, well, then I can maybe run for the Oras because I can't really run my party in the Dáil? Or could it be that the figures in the north behind the scenes that the other parties complain about all the time have decided that Mary Lou McDonald, you're running for the presidency?
Well, all of these matters are decided by the Ard Comhairle. They have a very tight, you know, like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have a national executive, but they just rubber stamp whatever the leader decides. It's completely different. The Ard Comhairle runs the party, and I'm saying the closest to the Ard Comhairle is Conor Murphy.
So might it not be that if this thing is floated, and Mary Lou McDonald, having said a number of times earlier this year that she wouldn't be the presidential candidate, and now is starting to let it be sort of said that she might be. Might that be because she has been told, because the leader follows what the Ard Comhairle tells her or him to do?
Well, all I'm passing on to you is that what Mary Lou's... Say if you go up to Mary Lou and say, oh, I think you'd make a great president. I think you'd win. I even heard Matt Cooper saying that on the podcast. If you go up to her, she'd say, you know what, everyone's telling me that. And she'd say, you're very generous and I appreciate that and all the rest of it. But she is not committing to run.
I never said she would make a great president. I said that I thought if she runs, she has a very good chance of winning. That's what I said.
Put it like this.
We just
have to... The most interesting thing is to see what hand of cards Fianna Fáil will play. And we'll just wait that development. Okay. But I'd say all bets are off until then.
We better take a break, and then we've got the Summer Economic Statement to talk about and the National Development Plan and a couple of other things that I want to bring in as well, which is an extraordinary planning decision that's been made up in Swords, which the Business Post has been reporting on, and also Michael O'Leary and the Metro to Dublin Airport. I think those are the things that we'll touch upon. And just by the way, just to remind you that although we're coming into the summer, we will continue to have subscription editions available to those of you who are subscribers. And we have, starting this weekend, the first of a series of interviews that we have recorded with people sort of outside but with a foot into the political system. This weekend we have an interview with the former government press secretary and former advisor to the government of Northern Ireland, Mandy Johnson, as part of a series, others with Pascal Taggart, Mark Mellett and Brendan Ogle, just to get Ivan wound up, a left-wing voice on this particular podcast. So they're all available. If you want to go to pathtopowerpodcast.com to become a subscriber, that's where you can do so and get that series of interviews over the next few weeks, but we will continue to have the main edition over the summer as well. And when we come back after the break, we will be talking about all of those Summer Economic Statement and budgetary issues brought up by the National Development Plan. That's after this.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. This fund is managed in Ireland. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Now, before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments could go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back to Path to Power. So let's get to the Summer Economic Statement and the National Development Plan, both of which were announced on Tuesday. And let's actually leave the National Development Plan for a moment and talk about the Summer Economic Statement, which I think is subject to change, to put it mildly. As we talk here on Thursday morning, the suggestions are that the European Union is becoming a bit more confident about doing a form of a deal with the United States about 15% tariffs, although at the same time, the European Commission is trying to get all member states to agree to punitive responsive tariffs to the United States. So maybe it'll all be sorted out by the time people hear this podcast, maybe not. But in some respects, did it not make the Summer Economic Statement a little bit redundant? How can the government actually bring forward a firm figures in relation to what it would increase spending by and what it would do in taxation with all of this uncertainty hanging over us?
So first of all, what was in the Summer Economic Statement? It said that the parameters of the 7th of October 2026 budget was a package between tax changes and spending, which would be limited to 9.4 billion. And the breakdown of that would be increases in expenditure of 7.9 billion and 1.5 billion in tax. So heavily weighted in favour of extra expenditure. When you drill down into the 8 billion of extra spending, you see, so where does that relate to the 5% notional cap they had before? On paper, it's 7.3% increase. But when you take out the extra capital spending, the situation is 6.4 increase. So when you look at a number of things that they are committed to already, the pay agreement runs from 24 to 26. So in 2025, there are two increases, one of 2% and one of 10% on the 1st of March and the 1st of August next year. They're committed to paying that. The welfare bill is 2.6 billion, so they're probably going to have to index that up by 2 or 3%. So actually, they're going to find it very difficult to live within that. But what's happened since that became obvious that 1.5 billion was the limit on tax, that 850 million of that will be taken up by the cut in VAT to 9, from 13.5% to 9%. And what I'm hearing is there's massive rollback because this was always a Fine Gael election promise, and it's in the programme for government, that they were going to change the date of it to the 1st of July, which means that on the never, but secondly, it wouldn't apply to accommodation, it would only apply to food and hospitality services. So a real rowing back there because they want to give other tax packages.
Well, sorry, can I come in on that?
Yeah.
Okay, just because there's a few things there. One of our fans on Path to Power, Owen Reedy, the Secretary General of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, yes, he laughs at the mention of your name as well, just like you laughed at the mention of his. He was in with me on The Last Word on Wednesday and arguing with a restaurateur about this. He describes this idea of the VAT reduction as economic vandalism. And he says this is completely unnecessary. If you look at the CSO figures, Fine Gael are promoting this as a job-saving measure, and he points out that over the last year there's been 17,000 extra jobs created in the hospitality sector. Yes, there are businesses closing, but for every business that's closing, there's about 11 opening up. This is an unnecessary use of the money that is actually there available to them. And there's a number of other points in this. I mean, I think your point that you made recently in relation to a slowdown in the economy and the potential of recession is very...
Did you see Warren Buffett said there's a recession coming?
Yeah, okay. For Ireland or for the world?
For the world. He never gets it wrong.
Yeah. So anyway, the point I was making anyway is that... yeah, that's all right. I'm used to it, Ivan. I'm used to it, okay? But the point that he was making was, the point I was trying to make is you say if the recession is coming and if things are slowing down, I'm not sure that a 4% cut in VAT or a 4.5% cut is going to encourage any person to go out and say, well, look, there's a 4.5% reduction in the price of the VAT. I'll go out and have a meal now that I wasn't going to have. Or I'll go to the pub and have a few drinks that I wasn't going to have. Particularly as it actually won't mean anything to the consumer. That 4.5% reduction will not be handed on. It's going to be used by the cafes and the restaurants and the pubs and whatever to actually try and maintain their own margins. It's going to make, for the 850 million that you would spend, it's going to have shag all benefit, I'd say, to the consumers of Ireland. And in reality, it's not going to get any extra trade in the door or any real extra benefit for the companies who are looking for it. What do you say to that?
All I can say is that, you know, the 180,000 people who are working in the hospitality sector don't share that view. And I take it as a bit rich that those who are getting the beneficiaries of the extra 8 billion in public expenditure, the people in the permanent pensionable jobs that are soaking up all the state's resources created by the hard-earned private sector. No wonder Owen Reedy's against it, because the people he represents are actually getting every cent really of the taxes that are used, and therefore I think to give a break to a situation where a sector has been really under pressure is justified. But either way, that's beyond my pay grade.
Okay,
the government have made a decision on that.
Well, I'm not sure. From what you're saying, I'm not sure they have made a decision as such. This will be a major problem between Fine Gael, and there may be some clawback on it, because just look, if there's only 1.5 million available for taxes, billion. Sorry. And here's another part: the VAT on electric bills has been reduced from 13.5 to 9. Right? Can you really think that the government is going to turn around and say, when they start clawing back, or they don't give the cost of living measures, the 150 quid by 2 that they gave off people electricity bills, and when people aren't going to have that they suddenly find they're paying an extra 4.5% VAT? I don't think so. I think that's somewhere the government is going to have to use some of the money. That's about 150 million, I think. So if you do 850 million for the hospitality sector, 150 million on the VAT and electricity, you've only got $500 million left in relation to tax measures. I'm not
Unless
sure.
you raise taxes, something like vapes.
Well, I don't know how much you'll get out of that on vapes.
I think you might get a fortune out of it.
My point is that 500 million, the balance that is left, I don't think would even be enough to allow for indexation, which means every taxpayer would be worse off as a result of this subsidy to the hospitality sector.
Yeah, and that's fair comment. The real kind of bone shaker of undermining their own credibility with the summer economic statement was, and someone says, what have you factored into this arithmetic of the 9.4 billion package on tariffs? And say, we've assumed it's zero. Which are the dogs on the street? No, it's either 10 or 15%. So that is nonsense. And obviously the Department of Finance have done their own estimates, even at 10%, that it would stop 75,000 jobs that would have otherwise been created. Pascal has been out there doing. So actually, they actually imploded their own summer economic statement by saying, essentially, all bets are off if the tariffs are other than zero, which they will be.
Did you see Seamus Coffey's analysis from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council? I mean, it's actually quite damning. If you look at it, like, he actually says...
He's saying counter-cyclical.
Well, what he's saying, all points to poor planning and budgeting. I mean, he goes through, it's quite complicated to go through all the figures and the rest of it. But basically, he just tears it apart. He tears it to shreds, the idea that this is proper allocation of money. He said the 1.5 billion would be the equivalent to indexing the tax system. And that's why I'm saying to you, if you have $1 billion of that taken for other measures, then everybody is essentially worse off. I can't see that having any benefit politically to the government. He is also, looking at, taking the corporation tax receipts and the rest of it, that if you didn't have the windfall corporation tax receipts, that the government is forecasting a budget deficit of almost 11 billion next year. But he also makes he says, more generally, the government's budgetary plans are focused on the short term. The government is yet to outline a fiscal framework. It has not set a limit for what it sees as a sustainable pace of net spending growth. And I suppose what he's also pointing out, as you just said there as well, is that, well, there seems to be a concentration. They say, we're going to be prudent, but they're continuing to allow day-to-day spending to increase by more than 5% per annum.
Not only that.
Then they say they'll cut it back, and this is the point, they'll cut it back in the downturn. But you don't cut it back in the downturn. That's when you're supposed to have the reserves to let free. Just
on the point you said about permanent increase in public expenditure, our friend Ian Guider sent me the international, it didn't get reported much, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, did a study into Irish public expenditure. And they focused on infrastructure, health and education, infrastructure that the fact that it's just not impacting in terms of progress on the ground. But on health expenditure, it actually said that it's gone out of control. And I'll put it in simple terms for you. Of total public expenditure, which has gone from 90 billion to 120 billion in total, 1 in 5 of every euro of public expenditure was on health. It's now 1 in 4. And they actually point to the fact that health expenditure, and we've all talked about the demographic costs projecting forward, that health expenditure is completely out of control, and that they do a detailed, I won't bore you with it, it's about 60 pages long, but I thought that was a really good independent study that looked at other EU member states and said that Ireland is completely out of line. So there's no one even talking about that. So Seamus Coffey's central point is this: if the tariffs impact badly, we have a situation, and IBEC's budget submission said this, that the budget surplus projected to be this year 6.3 billion will become a deficit of 6.8 billion, because 1 in 7 of all taxes come from foreign direct investment. And his point is this: well, it's actually the point of government when things are going bad that you'd be there to support industries, support services and so on, and to keep the pipeline of infrastructure going. But basically, I would have to say that I thought, and let's get on to the big issue, which is the National Development Plan. It was quite shocking, the performance of the government.
Okay. Tell us why you think it was shocking.
Well, it's a simple question, asked Micheál Martin. So just going through these figures, Taoiseach, this 36 billion, you say it's for housing. Does that include or exclude the Irish water component? Or we made it categoric that it excludes it. Now, bear in mind, Deloitte have said to build the houses you said you're going to build between 26 and 30 will cost 122 billion. That is the cost of it. So even the 36 billion. And then Jack had to intervene and say, sorry, Taoiseach, it's actually 28 billion for housing. That in the 36 billion includes the water money. Like, he was made a complete idiot of. Like, you'd think, if this is your headline issue, you would get that right. So that was just so beyond embarrassing. So
this is now the revised NDP, because we had, after the COVID crisis, we had the renewed NDP. Now, the revised NDP has an extra 100 billion euro in it, right?
Can I go through this in some detail?
I know.
Okay.
But sorry, but I could say, as Miriam Lord put it well in the Irish Times, the 2021 version was roundly criticised for having too much detail. The 2025 edition has been roundly criticised for having very little detail.
So remember, this was signposted since the government was formed in late January as going to be their flagship event to chart the course of the future. So let's be clear. So first of all, they then decided to throw in 26 to 2030 is exactly what's required. Medium-term planning. They decided,
lifetime of the government.
Yeah. What they said was, oh no, we're going to go to 2034, and they threw in this figure of 275 billion. Well, I think we can safely dismiss anything beyond 2030. There will be a different government deciding on this, and who knows where we will be in terms of an economic or global crash or whatever.
Then can I just fill in the figures for listeners? So between 2026 and 2030, which means from this budget in October on.
Which is the only bit we can take seriously.
That's right. The total sum to be spent in that time is €102 billion. And that's an increase of 34 billion on what it had previously put in for that time.
No, can I say, in fairness to them, that is if you take the 5-year money for each department's capital provision.
Yeah.
So, for example, agriculture gets 1.6 billion. The 36 billion is there, which includes
for
Irish
housing.
Water's money and so on. But separate to that, if you go on in the document, 10 billion of equity has been allocated to the utility companies. Now, again, it's not clear. So it's 2 billion for ESB Networks. It's 1.5 billion for EirGrid, which is doing the North-South interconnector. And it's not clear for the 6.5 billion remaining, whether the 2 billion for Metrolink is out of the 2 billion or whether Irish Water, Ishcairn gets all the rest. But basically, that is a really good move to provide equity finance.
Will it be enough,
because it means,
I wonder?
well, put it like this, it allows them to borrow as well.
True.
So it strengthens their balance sheets.
I'm sorry, can I just say, of the additional 34 billion, 20 billion is due to what's been the cash reserves.
Yes.
So this is the 14 billion from the Apple tax money, 2.5 billion from the sale of AIB shares, and they're also going to raid the money that had been saved in the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund. So of the additional 34 billion, 20 billion comes from that, and I suppose the other 14 billion comes either from increased taxes, or if you have a fall off in the corporation windfall taxes, they'll have to go and borrow. And that raises the big question, I suppose, as well, is that if you just take it historically, we have an infrastructure deficit that we need to catch up on, which goes back essentially to the crash and the Troika. Because when the Troika came in and told us to stop spending money, because of the concerns about excessive austerity, certain current spending was actually protected and saved. But the capital spending was sort of go. That's why things like Metro got cancelled and lots of other things. And we now have, I think there was a study done by the IMF that we're about 1/3 behind where we should be, our international comparisons, on the spending on the sort of the stuff that we need to continue as a productive economy. So there is a dramatic requirement to spend this money. And there's a very strong argument that if the economy turns down, while what governments always do is they cut back on the capital spending to protect the current spending. They have to do the opposite. They will have to take tough decisions in relation to taxation, social welfare payments, all the things which will lead to quite legitimate complaints. But if you actually are going to invest in having a better country and a better society and a more productive economy in the future, you actually have to invest the capital in all of this stuff.
Yeah, and look, we see stories. For example, ESB Networks, a housing estate in Portlaoise of 80 people. The houses completed last February. It'll be next February before they can be connected up to the grid. Like, that is real life issues of an emergency situation infrastructure. So, on a top line basis, to give 34 billion to infrastructure, A, is better than giving it to current spending. B, it is good idea to give certainty because we need a pipeline for the contractors that are now, like, if you look at the figures from the CIF, all the growth of the main contracting firms, your BAMs, your CISCs, your top, sanitary services, civil engineering contractors, it's all in the UK. They're growing their business. So the fact of the matter is they need certainty to gear up, and I've no doubt that they can deliver this. So to have this 34 billion allocated, it's the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. But you'd think somebody in the room would have said, now, shall we just look at what we announced in Cork when we last did this NDP announcement in 2021? And how many, because they did have, it was nearly 200 pages long.
It was four times the length of this exact document. And it made specific commitments. And they're not going to make the mistake of making specific commitments again,
but the point is that you think someone of the tens of thousands of people they have doing this stuff, they'd say, now let's just do an appraisal of how we got on and what lessons would we learn. And so one of the things you would think that would be a no-brainer to include on this is that we're now going to have a new process for the North-South interconnector, the Water Shannon scheme, the Greater Dublin drainage project, and about 10 projects that you would consider in terms of road. And you know what they've actually decided, which is crazy. Like, you could not believe this. They said the reason why we don't have a list of projects is that we're now giving an envelope of cash to each of the line ministers to decide, and they'll come back with their priorities. What we learned, Matt, from 2021 is that you have to go through 5 stages of consent and business approval from deeper. And that, plus the planning problem, meant that these things never got built. So you'd think they'd announce, we've learned lessons from 2021. We're changing for major infrastructure the planning process and introducing a lower level of consultation. But separately, we're going to fast track, like we did for the Adair bypass, the consent process. And they're saying, now they've actually said, no, the departments are going to come back in the next few months with their list of priorities. But they're going to be subject to the very same game of obstacle race of snakes and ladders. They've learned nothing from why we didn't deliver on the last plan.
And I'll just give you some concrete examples as well of things that were announced 4 years ago. In new hospitals. Remember, we were told there were going to be the day-only hospitals. There was going to be, to relieve the pressure on the public hospitals for Cork, Dublin, and Galway.
Three elective hospitals. So the provision is 9.25 billion for health. And one of the interesting things that Pierce Doherty said, that when they were doing their manifesto promises for those 3 hospitals, plus the maternity hospital, plus I think it's an extra 5,000 beds in the system, plus the completion cost of National Children's Health, that 9 billion won't get you that.
And that's even before you get to the digitalisation of records, which is another 2 billion.
Yeah, and that really has to be done. That's the electronic health records. We're the worst in Europe in relation to that. So what we've actually done is we've actually made no decisions on what projects are going to be fast forwarded, other than a few flagship ones.
Sorry, there's an extra 2 billion to bring the metro forward. Okay, so I know
that's a problem.
Well, let me see. I have to tell people who are not watching on YouTube or are listening to this. This is Ivan stays on his knees for the entire duration of this podcast to relieve his back. Now, when he interviews Michael O'Leary, he usually becomes prostrate, I should say, rather than phosphate, sorry. But anyway, maybe that was... Anyway, Michael O'Leary, your hero, like a man you do believe is the greatest businessman of all time.
He's the highest individual taxpayer in Ireland.
Well, he is.
Some soot for that.
And in fairness, I would praise him, unlike many others of the billionaire class, he has not decided to go offshore to try and limit his contribution to the national coffers. However, he has been out this week describing Metrolink as a massive waste of money. He gave an interview to the Business Post. He says it's infrastructure that isn't necessary. He says the government can't be trusted to deliver infrastructure, and we do not need a Dublin Airport Metro when Dublin Airport's already very well served by buses. So he says more bus transfers, more bus transport, and stop doing all these stupid trains and trams that fundamentally don't work. Now, he goes further than that, in that he says, if Dublin was serious about a traffic plan, you'd be building a bridge across Dublin Bay to make the M50 an orbital network. And he also says, because of the housing stock being built outside of Dublin, he wants an outer M75 to link across to Navan, Maynooth and down to Naas and out as far as Wicklow to get the congestion off the M50. I can only imagine any environmentalists listening to us at the moment are just going, oh my God, what is he trying to do? But what do you think of that O'Leary position? Because remember, he was the guy who told us that we didn't need Terminal 2 in Dublin Airport, or that if we did, that it should be just sort of a cheap shack rather than what was actually built. I think, is there anyone now who would seriously say that Terminal 2 in Dublin Airport, even if it cost an awful lot at the time, way more than we expected, wasn't actually a good investment?
I think the specific point he made, which will have some resonance, is that say you're living in Cork or Wexford or whatever, you actually need a point whereby, yes, you need to be dropped at the door of the terminal of the airport, but you need somewhere to park your car. And he's saying that people getting the metro will be dropped into the city centre or at different points, none of which have parking facilities. And he's saying from that point of view, it simply doesn't work as a national hub and spoke for people who are accessing the airport. And I actually thought about that and said, okay, so where would you work it? And I think he has a point in that.
Hold on, there's a few things in relation to that. He can't get away from his car dependency. right? The idea is that you would use public transport. And there's another point.
But you have to carry your luggage. You take Aileen's bag and your bag and so on. Then the golf clubs have to come. You need a place to actually park your car so you can load up. Well, you're not going to be carrying them from your home to the Lewis Centre or the
why not? I hire the golf clubs when you get to the foreign thing. You travel light. The airlines
I forgot you hire a driver to get to the airport.
That's called a taxi, Ivan. It's called a taxi, right? Don't bring the car and don't park it up in Dublin Airport. The metro isn't just about Dublin Airport. Now, I think they've calculated that 18% of trips would originate from the airport, but the metro is for all of North Dublin and for all the parts that it services along the way. So I went and I had a look at a piece that was done recently by Professor Brian Caulfield of Trinity College. And his argument on behalf of the metro is that it would carry about 53 million passengers in its first year, and going from there, that it would connect 127 schools, 3 universities, 5 hospitals. During peak times, trains would arrive every 90 seconds. And that 53 million passengers in its first year is as many as the Lewis carried last year. So that would do an enormous amount of benefit for getting traffic off the roads. It's not going to solve congestion in the city, but it will actually help ease congestion somewhat, particularly as the population gets bigger and there are more people. And as the population gets bigger, the reality is we're going to need this metro system. We're actually going to need it, or else when you're getting dropped off around Dublin, when Deirdre brings you up from your country mansion estate and brings you to one of your many gigs. I take the
ferry anyway. So there's no benefit to me.
You can't take the ferry from Wexford to Dublin.
No, but I know you're
already in holiday demob mode and you're looking forward to the ferry later.
Can I also say one of the things that you have waxed lyrical about is the extra 980 prison spaces. Yeah. I'm not convinced that the 2.18 billion allocated to justice will build all of those places by 2030. And I think in the same way that the health one requires further explanation, the other thing that is definitely the case, the Greens aren't in the building anymore and the retrofit thing has been scuppered. This idea that there's going to be state-funded 500,000 homes retrofitted, you can kiss goodbye to that. This is the nature of the overall presentation of these things in the government press centre, that there is no detail, there's no accountability. So there you have it in relation to climate change. That's SEAI's budget is going to be greatly curtailed.
Well, I know that Micheál Martin made claims in relation to climate change and all the rest of it, and that this was a climate change plan and the rest of it, but it was very much downplayed. It was very much, you're right, not the way it would have been. But Tony, there's an incredible story as well. That was in the Business Post on Wednesday evening by Killian Woods. And this is a real example, I think, of perfection being the enemy of progress. Fingal County Council has told Cairn Homes that it can't complete a 640 home development in Swords until the Metrolink is up and running, which could be 10 years' time if Metrolink ever happens. So Cairn applied for permission to develop 640 homes on a near 14 hectare site known as the Estuary Westlands at Hollybanks near Swords in County Dublin. And basically, the plans to deliver the homes have been halted. They can only put up 305 units, or nearly half the development, and essentially they've been told they can't do the rest. This is real chicken and egg type stuff. If you build the houses, well, then you increase the likelihood of Metrolink actually being there to service it. And even if Metrolink isn't there, surely you can put more buses in to serve it. We have a crisis in relation to the provision of housing. And look, I know, and I even mentioned this in a podcast recently, I was a bit taken aback recently while in Tyrrellstown to see the development of all the houses and seemingly very few facilities to go alongside it. But we can't just say, well, until we have the schools in place or the public transport in place. Yes, they all should be built alongside, if possible, the new housing. But if they're going to be delayed in their construction, when we have a housing crisis, surely we still have to build the houses.
And this is why the commencement orders is now at levels that were last seen in COVID. simply because, and the government absolutely obstinately refuse to put this front and centre when they're doing their big 275 billion launches. If you can't get planning permission for this stuff, it ain't going to be built. And they're not prepared to acknowledge that. They're not prepared to as I discussed on the last podcast, remove elements of the Planning Act 2024, which has made things worse in many respects, unless they curb the mission creep by the judicial review process, unless they make on board Planola fit for purpose, unless they relax the density requirements, unless they get the planning regulator to back off, we are simply not going to get to first base, because the people who can build the houses and the construction firms that can build them are being stymied at every hand's turn. The planning process, and the governor of the central bank said this, is the biggest contributor to the lack of housing.
Well, I'm going to finish off by bringing up one thing that I'm sure will get a bee into your bonnet as you head off.
Don't tell me about AIB and hybrid
That's it.
work.
That's exactly it. AIB and hybrid working, because the staff are livid that they've been told they have to come into the office a minimum of 3 days each week.
Well, this is absolutely shocking. What's been published here is the trade union representing this published so there's 10,000 employees with AIB, and they decided that people would have to do a minimum of 3 days work in the office. So the Financial Services Union, the FSU, posted a lot of the comments, they were just so pathetic, they're unbelievable. Look,
hold on. I'm going to read some of them, because these are legitimate positions for people to maintain. I suspect a lot of people...
Go get another job. It's very simple. If you don't want to work for the bank, if you want to work at home, if you want to watch your Netflix and do your parenting, fine. But just go get another job.
But sorry, I don't think any of these people are saying that they are unwilling to do their hours.
They want the lifestyle and they don't want the job.
Okay, it said... I'm going to read some of these things. Jesus, you're in a great interrupting mood today.
No, they were outrageous.
You don't want to hear.
They were so self-indulgent.
Can I let our listeners know what they are, right? They say that it completely disregards the struggles of working families already face with limited childcare and creche spaces available. Another one says a solution to a problem that didn't exist, forcing staff to be less productive, less motivated and more stressed. Okay, that's an interesting point. Oh, no, hang on a second. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that there are people who do not have the lengthy commute coming in who actually do produce more when they're working from home. Now,
I know they can't answer the phone when they're working from home. Everything is done through a Teams call, which is grossly inefficient. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you go into a retail branch of the bank and you see how long you have to queue for. You see the restricted hours. If people actually turned up to their work, there would be a better, believe it or not, customer service.
But you see,
what about the customer?
There's also a greater societal cost as well. If you actually, this morning, I walked over here to our studio and I was again taken by how little traffic was actually on the roads. But you know what I put that down to? It's the fact that the schools are off. Our big problem with traffic a lot of the time is actually bringing children to school by car when they should be walking or should be getting the bus. Now, I know there are people who have maybe long distances to travel to school. There are plenty of examples I know of, particularly where I live, of people at very short walks to school and they're still dropping the children off via car. That's one. But if you bring all of these people in AIB and Bank of Ireland and all sorts of, and in state employment, back into the office on a daily basis. You remember last week how you were crying and moaning and cribbing because you got caught in a traffic jam on your way in here?
Absolutely.
You will find it every time you're getting dropped in here by Deirdre, because you don't always use the train. You will find yourself for hours in the car.
Well, you mentioned the train. I hope Barry Kenny is listening. So the last day I did the podcast on Tuesday of this week, it was unbelievable. So I told you about the literal shit show that they never emptied the tanks and the toilets all couldn't function.
No, you didn't tell us that.
No, what happened was, so the trains go from Wexford, Rosslare to Connolly. Yeah. They empty the toilets, tanks, right? One day, they didn't bother. So therefore, when the train went back up again, you had to stop in Wicklow, stop in Arklow, stop in Gorey for people to go to the toilet. Train delayed by an hour. But anyway, I got the dart out after doing the last podcast. You see, you have no idea where people outside of Dublin have to live. So anyway, got on the train, and the train came in at 14 minutes past 5 on Tuesday evening into Bray. And Nicky, the driver, who I know well, he get out, he said, "We're in trouble here, Ivan." He said, "This train is going no further." And I said, "What?" He said, "No, everyone is going to be bussed. And the buses will stop in Greystones and Wicklow and all the way." I said, "With my back, I can't do that." And he said, "You know what the problem is?" He said, "This happened last week. There was a fella on the tunnel overhead of Bray Head, decided he was thinking of jumping. And he didn't get down. And there's a train comes on the hour, 5:15, 6:15 and 7:15. And so basically the guards had to negotiate with this guy. He was back. He'd done it the previous week and all trains were cancelled. There was 300 people on the train, had to disembark with huge amounts of luggage going to Rosslare. I mean, like, when is someone going to take charge of this country and decide that the interests of 900 people who are going on journeys just can't be messed around with in this day?
Well, hopefully that individual who clearly has mental health issues...
No, it's the 900 individuals that I'd be dealing with.
Well, I think you also have to consideration and concern for that person as to what help he got so that he didn't come back again. But I suppose on a lighter note, your story in relation to the train has given me the idea. I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix documentary Poop Cruise, which is all about a luxury travel liner.
I'm not at home.
A luxury
I'm
travel
not at home
liner.
sitting around watching, what do we watch on Netflix?
Sorry, the luxury travel liner, which got all the toilets malfunctioned and a documentary was made about it. I'm not thinking there may be an Ivan Yates version in relation
Barry
to
Kenny
your
needs to get
train
his finger
journeys
out.
to Wexford.
But
Poop train with Ivan Yates. I'm going to sell it to Netflix.
No, my point is this. AIB should start regarding how are our customer services? And if, like, I had a situation of someone close to me who was basically between Berlin and London working a job. They said you had to spend 3 days in the office. This is happening everywhere, not just AIB. And he had to make a decision between a lifestyle and his job, whether he was going to stay in that job or commit to that job. And you know what? 90,000 jobs were created last year. We have 2.8 million people at work. When that ain't happening anymore, a la Trump or anything else, there's going to be a cold shower for all these snowflakes who want the best of both worlds, working at home 4 days, a la Maya, and 3 days is a perfectly reasonable request.
Will you be in better mood when you come back from your holidays?
No. I mean, like, you indulge just because, why can't you just learn to say? And this is the problem with parenting today. People just won't say no. No, if you want you'd make a decision. If you want this job, if you want the big salary, you'll work 3 days a week. End of.
And that is the end of today's podcast. Don't forget, as I told you earlier, there is more in our subscriber edition, pattopowerpodcast.com. The first of our interviews with Mandy Johnson. And we will have a podcast for you next Friday as well. Despite Ivan's holidays, we will be doing our scores on the doors for each of the government ministers, some junior ministers and opposition leaders as well in our podcast next weekend. So don't worry, we will continue to provide a service for you on a weekly basis.
But rest assured, the politicos
recess.
are on holidays anyway, and the senior civil
service. You must
service.
miss that, do you? I don't know why you gave up politics in missing that. Okay, until the next time, from me, Matt Cooper.
From me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us.